Welcome. Welcome to this month's webinar on More Than Surviving, Thriving the Crisis. And I welcome you this evening. I hope that you find this information useful as we move through it. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to either use the chat feature or you can also email info@mindfulhealingspace.com and I will be sure to get back to you with information. So my name is Glenda Miles and I am one of the therapists and coaches at Mindful Healing Space. I've been working with clients in mindfulness, meditation, and teaching yoga for over 10 years now, and coaching for about 11, almost 12 years now, and I've been a therapist for over 5. Prior to that, I had an 18-year marketing career before leaving and entering into this new area of my life. So today, here's what you can expect. We're going to talk about stress and a little bit about what's happening in our body as a way of educating ourselves and providing the information about what's happening so that we can interact with it in a different way. And then we're going to be going through some of the coping strategies that we can be using in this environment today with everything going on with the pandemic. People are certainly feeling more stress than ever before. And so we want to talk about some really concrete ways that we can manage our stress. And specifically, we're going to go through some techniques and practice some of the techniques tonight that hopefully you will find useful. So what is stress? Stress is a physiological response of the body to any demand placed upon it. So sometimes we think of stress as a negative, but in fact, it can be quite positive as well, which we're going to go through and talk about what is optimal, because what's optimal for you might be different than for me. But stress is also a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances, which I think we can all agree we are all currently living under some a very demanding circumstance, and is causing a lot of emotional strain. And if you are like most people, which I'm sure you are, you're having good days and harder days through this. And some days it seems that we're managing quite well, and other days it's a little bit harder. And that can be part due to the extra stressors that we're under right now. So often I use the example of being at the gym. If you've ever lifted weights, you know what it's like to add some extra weight that one time when you move up in the weight category. So I think often about doing squats and adding that extra, the first time you add a bit of a plate to it. And you're going down and you're putting, of course, an additional demand upon your muscles to respond. And your body has to respond, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can actually be quite good in the sense that you're building muscles, you're making it work a little bit harder. And sometimes that's what these conditions do. They make us work a little bit harder. And certainly there is very much a, can you handle it? So when you think about the current circumstances, do you believe you can handle it? So there is no right or wrong answer, but how you answer that right now as you think about it, that will probably be a huge predictor in you actually handling it. So how we think about things certainly affects how we're able to move through it. And we'll talk a little bit more about mindset in a little bit. But we certainly need to understand how stress is on your body, and how you deal with stress and feel stress is going to be slightly different than me, although there's certainly some commonalities. So when we think about fatigue, so lots of people right now are feeling a heaviness of fatigue that even though they might be getting a good night's sleep, maybe not, they're certainly feeling some extra tiredness throughout the day. Stomach problems, anger, anxiety, headaches, maybe hard time focusing, a little bit of apathy, like, oh, don't even care right now. teeth grinding, some of the muscle tension, often in our face and in our neck and in our traps, skin irritations even. And certainly some people are seeing decreased sex drive with some of the symptoms of stress. And of course, this isn't limited to the current situation. This is often how people feel with stress. And one of the issues is, moments of stress are fine. We can deal with that, but it's when we're under chronic stress or prolonged periods of stress that becomes a real issue. So think about it this way. Our nervous system is a beautifully designed thing. It's designed to help us in situations, right? So in a normal state, our parasympathetic nervous system is engaged. It's the part of the autonomic nervous system, the automatic part that controls all the things in our body that we don't really think about, like our heart rate. We don't really think about, okay, heartbeat, right? Can you imagine? Our heart wouldn't be beating. We'd have moments where we were thinking about something else. So these are things that are automatic, the autonomic nervous system controls. And that's either parasympathetic or sympathetic. And that's kind of the two sides. If one's on, the other's off. So we want the parasympathetic to be engaged. This is where what we often call the rest or digest. So this is where we're good. We're hanging out in this stage where things can work. Our digestion is working. Our reproductive system is working. All of the systems in our body are functioning. Now, imagine for a moment that there is a threat around us. Whether that's a perceived threat or a real threat, our body responds the same. And our sympathetic nervous system is engaged. When it's engaged, it does one of three things: fight, flight, or freeze. Now, this is meant to be those moments of, uh-oh, something's happening, body reacts, and then we deal with it and we come back to a parasympathetic response, body calms down. The trouble is we live in a world where our sympathetic nervous system is constantly being engaged. And for some people, even the on switch is on continually. And this is very fatiguing to the body and to the systems. Now, imagine when the sympathetic nervous system is engaged, things like our digestion slows down, because if you need to fight somebody off, you don't need to be expending energy digesting food or reproducing. And so often we see a correlation with things like non-medical fertility issues being related to chronic stress, because again, we're in these states where our body is preparing to protect itself. So we want to engage the parasympathetic. And right now, when we're under stressful situations, which we are, we want to be doing those things that really engage the parasympathetic. And we're going to go through one of the main nerves related to the parasympathetic, which is the vagus nerve. And it's this amazing nerve that we're learning more and more about over the last probably decade in particular, that we didn't even know before. And so the vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body. It's the 10th cranial nerve. It starts in the brainstem and travels throughout the face, the neck, the lungs, the heart, the diaphragm, the abdomen. Includes some of those main digestive organs like the stomach, the colon, the intestines, the liver, kidneys, and spleen. So it's really connected to mood, our immune response, digestion, and heart rate, which are so important to our overall health and well-being. But you can see right now, in particular, immune system and our mood, for instance, in particular. Okay, so how do we engage the vagus nerve? So again, we're learning lots about it, but vagal tone, or the ability to kind of have a healthy tone of that nerve and it's working well. So the vagus nerve, again, turns on the parasympathetic, or is very much linked to that parasympathetic response. And if it's engaged, if it's working well, we have good vagal tone, we're able to kind of, for lack of a better word, we're able to read the faces of the people around us. We're able to sense whether we're safe. We're able to listen to other people. We're able to vocalize our needs and boundaries. We're able to emotionally regulate and create an equilibrium. And when this happens, what we notice is that we have the ability to be collaborative, and we're able to communicate what those needs are and to talk in a different way within community. And when we're able to do that, we can actually withstand higher levels of stress. So when we're in community and we're able to actually co-regulate together and have good vagal tone, we're actually able to deal with more things than we could if we aren't. So if we don't have good vagal tone, we drop to that lower order, which is that fight or flight response. And then we're moving and oscillating between the two. So this is why having a good vagal tone is so important to, as we're seeing right now, those people who are able to kind of work together, or what we call tend and befriend. So we're working together with other people to create other solutions to the problems that we face, and we're coming together as opposed to isolating. When we isolate or withdraw, we tend to be more in that protective and fight or flight response. So how do we tone? So how do we tone? Here's the beautiful thing: singing, chanting, humming, gargling, anything. So thinking about, right, where this nerve is, it's a lot right in here. And so doing anything that kind of moves that energy, singing, chanting, humming, is very good for the vagal toning. Gently massaging the face and the neck, again, that's where a lot of this nerve is, or the tentacles, if you will, of this nerve. Breathing, box breathing in particular, which is very balancing. So what is box breathing? We're going to do this right now. So if you take it, everybody exhale. Now on the inhale, we're going to breathe through the nose to a count of 4. So inhaling, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4, 2, 3, 4. Exhale for 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4, 2, 3, 4. Inhale 4 to 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. So when we're holding, whether at the top of the inhale or at the bottom of the exhale, it's just a gentle stopping, almost what I would call suspending the breath. So it's not holding it, but just suspending. And it's actually in the suspensions where we create space for possibility, if you will. So some of the other ways that we can tone: soft voices. This is why when, you know, we're trying to calm someone down, we use a soft, gentle voice because it helps them calm down. There's been some interesting research lately about cold water exposure, especially Wim Hof, if anyone is familiar with that. If not, I suggest you Google them. I won't even go into some of the work that he's been doing, but it's fascinating. And I suspect that there's two things. If anyone has dipped into the cold water, you know what you have to do is really breathe. It forces you to focus specifically on the present moment, to take deep, slow breaths, and to take control over your experience in your body and to calm. So it's quite interesting research that's been, and I highly recommend having a look through some of the work that he's been doing, but his method is specifically about learning how to be with your breath and taking control over your experience in your body and being able to push those limits of your experience then. So back to toning, some of the other things: laughing, smiling. I mean, there's a reason why we say laughter is good medicine, because it is, and it makes us feel good and it helps us calm. A healthy gut. So more and more research has been shown to relate to mental health and to gut health. So we want a healthy microbe biome in our gut. The healthier that bacterial combination, if you will, is, the healthier our mental health is. There's this real connection, and partly due to when we are able to engage the parasympathetic, we're able to digest healthier. When we're in chronic stress, it is directly linked to irritable bowel syndrome and many of the disorders that relate to digestive issues, because of course our digestion is being triggered on and off again in chronic stress because of the fight or flight response. So some of the other ways to tone, there's certain yoga postures, in particular restorative yoga, which again is about stimulating the parasympathetic. Doing body scans and loving kindness meditations are two other ways of engaging both what our experience is in our body as well as calming. Loving kindness meditations in particular are this beautiful way of kind of developing a different relationship with ourselves, creating calm, creating kindness, speaking both to ourselves and to others around us. And of course, physical exercise. There's a great book called The Joy of Movement by Kelly McGonigal. She's a PhD out of Stanford. She's done a few books, one actually on the upside of stress. And her most recent one is The Joy of Movement, which speaks to the research that she did that shows how group exercise in particular, we release oxytocin, which is a stress hormone, which, but it's also the one that actually causes us to come together, and it's a bonding hormone. So a bonding hormone, so going back to what I said earlier, when we are able to come together, befriend and tend to each other, we're actually able to deal with higher levels of stress. And what we noticed, or what in her research that she noticed, was when people are in group exercises, they're releasing these and they're actually bonding together with the people that are in group exercises and building this nature of collaboration and working together. So what stresses you out? Do you even know what stresses you out? Because knowledge is power. And when we have choice, we feel less helpless and more in control, and therefore less overwhelmed, less opportunity for anxiety. And if we've learned, in fact, that simple movement and breath exercises can trigger the body's natural relaxation response. So it's, again, stimulating that vagus nerve and triggering the body's relaxation. And so we have a lot of choice in how we interact with things. We don't necessarily have choice about what's happening around us, but we certainly have choice in how we respond to it. So I mentioned earlier how stress isn't a bad thing. And in fact, what we know is there's this optimal area for each of us, which may look different for you or for me, but we know that high performers actually undergo a lot of stress. So there's stress there, going back to the weightlifting, right? So we actually have to put our body, demand of our body, a certain amount in order for it to perform well or to perform at a high level. Now, too little, we get bored. Too much, it becomes overwhelming, we can't deal. So, there is this optimal place in the middle, and what we need to learn is what that is for us. And that may change time to time, day to day. Now, what you maybe a month ago or 2 months ago, what would have been optimal for you is going to be different than it is today, because we know stressful events and situations can actually add more stress and different, right? They can intensify symptoms, and in particular intensify symptoms of mental health concerns like anxiety, which really is that state of overwhelm. And so what was is no longer. And so now it's like coming to this, what we've been all saying, this new place of normal, and finding what's optimal for us, which may shift day to day. So mental health, let's talk a little bit about what is mental health. Mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of day-to-day life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So that's a lot of things. And there's different elements to that. And of course, we're not necessarily under normal conditions of stress in day-to-day life. This is very much a different place. And we're coming into a different phase, if you will, of this, where at the beginning, it was a big change. And now people are learning, okay, here's how I'm going to cope, and here's how I'm going to deal with things, and coming into the new normal. And so what may have impacted their mental health may come into a different place. Now, if you have one of the many mental health disorders, that may not be the case for you. So the number 1 and number 2 mental health disorders in North America are anxiety and depression, which is probably not that surprising. In fact, over 15% of prescriptions in North America written are for anxiety medications alone. And that's just what's prescribed and what's known. We know that there are many people dealing with these disorders that are not diagnosed and not getting medicated help for it. So now, if you have one of these 2 disorders, or many of the other disorders that are present in people, perhaps this is even complicated given the current situational stress and the very many uncertainties about how long this is going to last, what's it going to look like, what's the ultimate impact that it's going to be. So instead of focusing on that, I want to switch gears though into not the disorders or the illnesses that may be present, but in how do we create a state of well-being? Because that's really where we want to be, which may look, again, a little different today than it was a couple of months ago, but certainly we want to move towards this overall state of well-being. And we do have, again, some control in this. So this is a model. The Perma Model was created by Martin Seligman, who was the founder of the positive psychology movement. He's out of the University of Pennsylvania. You can find lots of information if you Google University of Pennsylvania and Martin Seligman. And he created this, and we've added the V onto it, which I think is a great addition. So here, I'm going to run through this model. P is for positive emotions, right? So the ability to actually feel the positive emotions, whether that's gratitude or happiness, contentment, joy, laughter, these are the things that we need to be feeling on a regular basis, okay? So E, engagement, the regular development of our strengths and those things that we're good at and enjoy doing. So how often in your day-to-day life do you use your strengths, and how often do you do just generally the things that you're good at? When we are able to do that, we tend to be more engaged in the work that we're doing in our day-to-day lives. So R is the relationships. Do you have authentic and engaging and supportive relationships? Whether that's with a primary partner, family, friends, community, whatever that may look like for you, being able to show up as yourself, as your authentic self, having deep connections with other people, feeling joy, and just feeling that connection to another person is really important. As we were talking about earlier, when we can collaborate in community and talk about things in community, we tend to be able to deal with higher levels of stress. So the M in this model is meaning. A sense of being connected to something bigger than ourselves. In your day-to-day life, is there something else? Whether that's a faith, whether that's the work that you do, the passion that you do, maybe it's volunteering, something. Maybe it's just being a member of a family, connecting to something bigger than just you. Achievement is the A, the self-belief and ability to pursue and accomplish goals. So not only accomplish or achieve goals, but to celebrate them. And I think that's often the missing loop, or part of the process for us is when we're working towards some goal or being successful, a lot of times it's very much about the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and we don't take a moment to celebrate how far we've come or who we are. And the last part of it is vitality, which is eating well, moving regularly, and sleeping deeply, which we're going to talk about more in a minute, because this is really not only the sense of vitality, but the energy. We need the energy in order to do all of the things that we want to do in our life. And when we lack the vitality or the energy, the other things are probably less likely to happen. So it's a very key part to our overall sense of well-being. So one of the things is, as we think about the Perma model, the sense of well-being, is how do you think you're doing? How well are you right now? And what areas do you think you need to work on? When we think about a situation, how we think about a situation affects how we respond to it. So this idea of mindset is so important. And in fact, I'm going to be doing next month a webinar just on mindset and what we can do to actually start to shift our mindset from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And a growth mindset focuses on the ability of humans to grow and adapt, that we have limitless potential, limitless. And with this in mind, how might we be able to reframe the current situation? Are you focused on the news that is consuming how terrible this is? Or are you consuming news of how people are responding and collaborating and actually creating amazing things together as a result? Remembering that things are not happening to you, things are happening around you, and you choose how it affects you. So when I say this, I need to be clear that we have 100% control over the things that we do. We have a moderate, I would say 75, 80, maybe even 90% over the thoughts that we think. So there's going to be random thoughts we don't have that, just kind of pop up in our head. But for the most part, we can actually control them, change them, insert another thought to challenge those thoughts that may be there. We probably have less control over how we feel, but what we do and what we think affects how we feel, and it actually affects our physiology, which we have less and less control over. So if our heart starts to race, we can't necessarily go, heart, please slow down. That may work, but probably not. But what we can do is start to take some slow, deep breaths into our belly. And as we do that, we'll notice our physiology change. We can start to think about something positive like gratitude, and all of a sudden our anger that we may have felt, or that heart racing, or that stomach clenching that we had a moment ago, as we think of gratitude and what we're grateful for, we will start to feel differently. And so the things that we do and the things that we think certainly have a huge impact on how we feel and our overall physiology. Remembering that the mind is like a muscle. The more we work with it, the stronger it gets and the more it's able to expand. So mindset is this amazing thing that we can actually start to interact with that has such an impact on the other parts of our life. Remembering too that we want to practice progress, not perfection. Practice progress, not perfection. We are not perfect beings in any way, shape, or form, nor should we have the expectation that we are? And sometimes when we're at the beginning of something new, it takes some practice before we master it. And even when we master it, something else will happen, like a world pandemic, that will kind of bring us back to some degree of humility and practice yet again. Self-discipline is an act of self-care or self-love. When we're able to discipline ourselves and to create the discipline of self, right? So discipline meaning the study of self, we can then move towards loving ourselves and caring for ourselves deeply. When we talk about self-care, what are we really talking about? We're talking about caring for ourselves and what is going on. And if we are detached from that which we are feeling internally, or the things that are happening internally, we can't truly care for ourselves in the way that we probably need. And so part of how we care for ourselves and our family and our community, especially right now, is about having a lot of self-compassion or kindness towards self, that this is a challenging situation to be in for all of us. It is challenging, and there are going to be good days and bad days, and we're all going to go through different periods of experiencing this, where we maybe aren't handling it the way we think we should. And having a degree of compassion for ourselves and those around us is really important. That we know at this point in the course of this pandemic that self-isolating is a form of community care, of caring for those around us. That even though you may not be impacted negatively, or in all likelihood not very negatively impacted by this, that your actions and your being impact other people, that there is a ripple effect to your choices. Social distancing physically, but connecting digitally, and we're finding that more and more people are using this tool like you're on today with Zoom and other places, where people are actually using social media and other platforms to actually connect. And in fact, I've heard so many stories of people connecting with people they hadn't seen or heard from for ages, and finally having the time, perhaps now that they're at home, working from home or being more at home and not having the distractions of the other things in their life, that they're able to sit down and have conversations with people using a positive mindset. That, again, how do we come together? How do we befriend and tend to each other in community and to ourselves? How do we take quiet moments during the day for ourselves to calm that nervous system? How do we maybe enjoy some of the tasks that we have to do, or make sure that in our day, some of those things that we do enjoy is part of our day? That we celebrate the accomplishments and the resiliency of our communities, because there are many accomplishments in every community across the country right now and around the world. So let's talk a little bit about some of the healthy coping strategies, and these will not come as a surprise. Okay, movement, eating well, getting a good night's sleep, socially connecting, laughter, play, read a book, learn something new. If you're not working right now, maybe volunteering to help in some way. You don't have to leave the house necessarily to do that. And, to find work that we can do to take care of ourselves and our communities and the people around us is important. These are the things we know we should be doing, but are not always the things that we do. And so right now is more important than ever to go back to learning how to incorporate these activities and habits into our day and into our week and into our lives again. Taking in nature if you can, getting outside, breathing in fresh air if you can, on days where you can, at least taking in some sunshine, going for walks if you can. So even today, I've been in client sessions all day, but in between client sessions, I've been going out my front door and just standing on the balcony or on my front patio, and just taking in some fresh air. Didn't have time to necessarily get outside for a walk yet, but taking in some fresh air and just taking a quiet moment allowed me to get through the next session and the day. One of the other really important things is to ask those around us, especially in our immediate circles, is, are you okay? Showing empathy. And I don't mean just saying, are you okay? And expecting yeah, I'm okay, or fine as the response, but truly being open to the dialogue that might follow when you ask, are you okay? So many people are learning the art of slowing down right now. They're at home, perhaps working, or at least their schedule of the many things that you used to do has slowed down. And for many people at the beginning, that creates a bit more anxiety. If you've been used to distracting yourself with the many things on your to-do list, not having those things may be anxiety inducing. Know that there is a period of time where your nervous system is just so used to being on in that fight or flight response that to come back down to a place of calm seems foreign to it. And so it takes a little bit of time to come back down. But when you do, you get to enjoy things and feel things that maybe you haven't felt for a while. And it really is creating this different relationship to yourself and the things around you. So here's a very simple practice. I want you to stop for a moment and just, if you're hopefully seated right now, just maybe take a few deep breaths. Inhaling deeply through your nose and allowing your belly to fill up. Slow, deep exhales. Starting to just notice how your breath feels in your body. Now, just start to look around. What are 5 things that you see around you? Can you just gently notice them right now? Perhaps name them. What are 4 things that you feel? Perhaps your feet on the ground, your bum in the chair. What else do you feel? What are 3 things you hear? Two things that you smell? One thing that you taste? This is a very simple grounding, centering exercise that if you feel yourself starting to get a little elevated, a little agitated, this simple exercise will bring you back into the moment and typically will calm you down a little bit. So let's take a moment to talk about mindfulness. What is it? Mindfulness is being in the present moment. Even now, are you fully engaged with me listening to this conversation, or are you kind of doing 2 or 3 or 4 things, perhaps, depending? Can you take this moment to simply be here with intent, without judgment, without trying to change anything? Can you just notice your own thoughts, emotions, or sensations that come up? Mindfulness is all about noticing and being in relationship to our inner world in a new way. Noticing our body's wisdom. Did you even know how your body feels when it's stressed? Can you become the observer of what's happening within you, whether that's the thoughts or you're in your body? Can you start to notice what's happening? Studies have shown that people who practice mindfulness have a 40% reduction in perceived stress. So if you didn't have a reason to do mindfulness before, maybe that in and of itself will convince you to start doing some of these practices. 40% reduction is pretty significant because we start to actually have an experience internally that lets us know what's going on, and we can respond to it differently or not at all. So some simple mindfulness practices that I love to teach are: how do you incorporate mindfulness into daily activities that you do all the time? Not necessarily sitting on a meditation cushion for 20 minutes a day, which is a wonderful practice, but for lots of people it's unrealistic. So how do you just start to, how do you incorporate mindfulness into daily activities like washing the dishes, or right now, washing your hands, feeling the water, feeling your skin, feeling the soap, and really having a full experience of being in the present moment without judgment and noticing all of the senses. Another practice is walking. Perhaps in between your day when you're taking little breaks, take a short walk and very slowly feeling into the walk. As you move your feet, as you move your body, can you feel every aspect of it? Can you notice it? Really noticing it, perhaps in a completely different way than you ever did before. I challenge you, in fact, to do so. Another one, of course, is what we did earlier with the sound, is what do you hear? And can you really take in some of those sounds? One of the practices is pick up a sound and really hear into it, and then let it go and find another sound, and do that a few times and really engage with what is happening. Again, you're not trying to change it, or you're simply trying to notice it and be with it in the moment. And eating is, of course, another one. So this is great when you do it with berries, especially fresh ones, but it's not quite that time of the year, at least not yet. And so taking a berry and putting it in your mouth and being very slow and purposeful, allowing your senses of taste and touch to fully feel what is happening in your mouth. The taste, the texture, the nuance of the berry in your mouth. These are the simple things that we can do in the day-to-day so that we start to develop a relationship with ourselves, so that when the bigger things happen, we have a little bit more of a connection to what is happening within us. For many of us, we live in our heads. We're taught to be in our head space, the intellectual space, and we're cut off from, I would say, 90% of our body, and 90% of the wisdom, the information that's continually being given to us from the outside world. And so part of not only coping with stress, but really coming out of this experience in a new way, and perhaps a new relationship with ourselves and what we know we can handle, our own resiliency, is in the practices that we start to cultivate now. And I hope that these practices, in particular the mindfulness practices that we just went through, are ways that you can cultivate this new relationship and start to learn to thrive. Going back to that state of well-being that we talked about, that Perma Model, where we allow ourselves to feel the positive emotions, that we feel our engagement and flow of activity, that we use that which we know we're really good at and contribute to the relationships and the communities that we live in a positive way. This will allow us to achieve our goals and to really celebrate the accomplishments that we collectively have. I thank you so much for your time tonight. I hope that you found a few nuggets of information to take with you. I mentioned I'll be doing a webinar on May 6th on mindsets. It'll be an hour's discussion specifically about the research of mindsets, but then how do we actually apply this again into our daily lives? Until then, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to email me, Glenda Miles, at info@mindfulhealingspace.com. I thank you again, and I wish you the best of the evening and your time.